My name is Stella, 33 years old, and currently the founder and chief executive officer of a $200 million financial technology firm. But to my family, I am the unemployed disappointment who threw her life away by dropping out of medical school a decade ago. Last night, during a mandatory family dinner, my father slid a thick legal document across the mahogany table. "Sign this right now," he demanded. "Your sister is pregnant and needs the Aspen property, and you do not even have a job, so shut your mouth." I simply smiled, slid the papers back, and watched my husband pull into the driveway in a $350,000 sports car. My father froze mid-sentence, and my mother completely lost her balance. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to toxic relatives who underestimated your worth. The dining room of my parents' sprawling Calabasas home always felt more like a courtroom than a place for family gatherings. Crystal chandeliers glared down on us, illuminating the carefully curated image my parents desperately tried to maintain, despite their hidden financial struggles. I sat at the far end of the table, nursing a glass of sparkling water, already exhausted by the charade. My mother, Susan, sat at the head of the table, her face pulled tight with disapproval, as she eyed my simple black dress. Beside her was my father, Richard, swirling a glass of expensive red wine he could barely afford. Across from me sat my younger sister, Brittany, 31 years old, practically vibrating with smug entitlement. She kept resting her hand on her perfectly flat stomach, making sure everyone noticed her brand new diamond tennis bracelet. Her husband Andre sat next to her, adjusting the cuffs of his tailored suit. As a risk management director at a mid-tier investment bank, Andre never missed an opportunity to remind everyone how important he was. The dinner had barely begun when the true purpose of the invitation was revealed. My father cleared his throat loudly, silencing the room. He reached into his leather briefcase beside his chair and pulled out a stack of crisp legal papers. He tossed them onto the table. They slid across the polished wood and stopped right in front of my plate. The bold header at the top read, "Relinquishment of Inheritance Rights." I stared at the document, keeping my face completely neutral. "What is this?" I asked quietly. My mother scoffed, crossing her arms over her silk blouse. "It is exactly what it looks like, Stella. We are restructuring the family assets. You need to sign over your rights to the Aspen cabin tonight. Brittany and Andre are expecting a baby, and they need a larger vacation property to accommodate their growing family." I looked at Brittany, who was smiling like she had just won the lottery. "You live in a 4-bedroom house in Brentwood," I pointed out, "and the Aspen property was left to both of us by Grandma." My father slammed his hand on the table, making the silverware rattle. "Do not argue with us. You are 33 years old, and you do not even have a real career. You dropped out of medical school to play around with computers in your bedroom. You have contributed nothing to this family name. Brittany is building a life. Andre is a successful banking executive. They need the equity from that house more than you do." The sheer audacity of the demand hung in the heavy air. For years I had tolerated their relentless criticism. When I left medical school to build my tech platform, they called me an absolute failure. When I quietly launched my company and secured millions in venture funding, I kept it a closely guarded secret, knowing they would only try to exploit my success. I chose to live modestly, letting them believe their cruel narrative because it kept them out of my bank accounts. But this was an entirely new level of blatant theft. They wanted to steal the only meaningful thing my grandmother had left me, simply to fund Brittany and her lavish lifestyle. I picked up the heavy brass pen my father had placed next to the documents. Brittany leaned forward, her eyes gleaming with absolute greed, fully expecting me to surrender, just like I always did when we were kids. My mother wore a triumphant smirk, already mentally spending the money they would get from refinancing the cabin. Instead of signing, I calmly capped the pen and pushed the paperwork back toward the center of the table. "No," I said very softly. "I am not signing this document today." The silence following my refusal was so absolute I could hear the refrigerator humming in the kitchen. My mother stared her mouth open in genuine shock. I had never outright defied them like this before. Usually I would nod, make excuses, and quietly leave to avoid a scene. But today was different. The days of letting them walk all over me were officially over. Andre let out a slow, condescending sigh. He leaned back in his chair, picked up his crystal tumbler, and took a deliberate sip of his aged scotch. He looked at me with the kind of pity reserved for a stray animal outside. "Stella, listen to yourself," he began, his voice dripping with forced corporate patience. "You are making an emotional decision instead of a logical one. As someone who manages risk and asset allocation for high net worth individuals every day, let me explain how the real world works." I kept my hands folded in my lap and waited for the lecture. Holding onto a luxury property in Aspen, when you have zero income stream, is suicide. Andre continued, gesturing with his glass. Property taxes, maintenance fees, and winterization costs are astronomical. You cannot afford to keep your half of the cabin. Brittany and I, on the other hand, are building a serious portfolio. My bonuses at the bank alone will easily cover the upkeep. We are offering to take a liability off your hands. You should be thanking us, not throwing a tantrum at a table full of successful adults. A table full of successful adults. The irony was physically painful. If Andre knew his mid-tier bank had been desperately trying to secure a capital injection from my firm for the past 3 weeks to avoid insolvency, he would have choked on his expensive scotch. But I kept my expression blank, letting him enjoy his fragile illusion of superiority. Brittany sensed the shift in power and jumped in. She let out a sharp, mocking laugh. "Honestly, Stella, look at you. You are sitting here in a plain dress that you probably bought 5 years ago. You do not care about your appearance anymore." She dramatically adjusted the orange leather bag sitting proudly on the empty chair beside her, making sure the gold hardware caught the light from the chandelier. "When you work hard and contribute to society like Andre and I do, you enjoy the finer things. You get to buy a real home for your child. You get to carry a Birkin. You simply do not understand our lifestyle because you have never bothered to elevate yourself." I shifted my gaze from Brittany to the bright orange bag resting on the chair. I had a trained eye for details. It was a requirement in my line of work where a single misplaced line of code could cost millions of dollars. I studied the bag carefully, then looked back at my sister's smug face. "Actually, Brittany," I said, my voice steady, "if you are going to lecture me about the finer things, you should probably know that the brand stamp on a genuine Hermes Birkin is heat-pressed, not printed. Also, the stitching on the handle of your bag is perfectly straight. The real manufacturer uses a saddle stitching technique which always has a slight angle. That bag is a cheap counterfeit. I am guessing you bought it out of the trunk of a car somewhere, or maybe Andre is not getting those massive bonuses he keeps bragging about." The color drained from Brittany's face. She snatched the bag off the chair and pulled it tightly onto her lap, her hands trembling as she tried to hide the seams. Andre slammed his tumbler down on the table so hard that the scotch splashed over the rim, staining the pristine white tablecloth. "How dare you disrespect my wife like that?" Andre barked, his calm corporate facade shattering. "We are trying to help you, you ungrateful failure." My mother gasped, clutching her napkin to her chest. "Stella, apologize to your sister this instant. You are out of line. You are projecting your miserable life onto her because you are jealous of her financial success." But it was my father who finally exploded. The veins in his neck bulged against his tight shirt collar. He pushed his chair back violently, the wooden legs scraping harshly against the hardwood floor. He stood up, towering over his end of the table, pointing a shaking finger directly at my face. His face was a mask of pure rage. "You do not even have a job, so shut your mouth," my father screamed, his voice echoing off the ceilings of the dining room. "Next time, do not come back to this house." He glared at me with absolute and pure hatred. I looked at my father, absorbing the venom in his voice. This was the moment they expected me to break. They expected the tears, the apologies, and the desperate begging for their approval that had defined my early 20s. They wanted me to sign away my grandmother's house just to buy my way back into their good graces. But as my father stood there red-faced and pointing his finger at me like I was a criminal, I felt nothing but absolute overwhelming peace. The final thread holding me to this toxic family had just been severed by his own command, and he had no idea he had just set me free. "I understand," I said perfectly calmly, my voice steady and completely devoid of emotion. "I will not come back." I slowly pushed my chair in and stood up, smoothing the front of my simple black dress. I picked up my small clutch purse from the table. The room was suffocatingly silent, heavy with the anger they expected me to absorb. My mother was glaring at me, waiting for me to walk out in shame. Brittany was grinning clearly, thrilled that she had won the battle for our parents' favor. But before anyone could say another word, a low guttural roar echoed from the street outside. It was not the sound of a normal engine. It was the aggressive, unmistakable growl of a twin-turbo V12. The sound vibrated through the floorboards of their heavily mortgaged house, rattling the crystal glasses on the dining table. Two piercing LED headlights sliced through the darkness of the front yard, sweeping violently across the dining room windows and casting long, dramatic shadows across the walls. My father froze mid-breath, his hand still suspended in the air. Andre snapped his head toward the window, his corporate arrogance instantly replaced by pure confusion. We all watched as a sleek midnight blue Aston Martin DBS rolled smoothly into the driveway, the wide performance tires crunching softly against the gravel. The sheer presence of the $350,000 machine made my parents' manicured lawn and fake luxury lifestyle look like a cheap theatrical backdrop. The engine idled for a second with a deep, menacing purr before shutting off. The driver's side door opened. Out stepped Dominic. He was 35 years old, a highly successful commercial real estate developer, and the man who had supported me every single day since I started my company. He was wearing a dark charcoal bespoke tailored suit that fit his broad shoulders with razor-sharp precision. He did not look like a man who rented cars for a weekend joyride. He looked like the man who owned the entire bank that Andre worked for. Dominic adjusted his cuffs, his silver luxury watch catching the glow of the porch light, and leaned casually against the driver's side door, looking toward the front door with quiet confidence. I turned back to the table, offering my stunned family one final polite smile. "My ride is here," I said smoothly. The impact of those 4 words, combined with the visual of the supercar parked in their driveway, was catastrophic. Total suffocating silence fell over the dining room. My father, who had just been screaming at me with absolute hatred seconds ago, stood frozen like a statue. His mouth opened and closed silently, unable to process the wealthy reality parked just feet away from his window. Next to him, my mother literally dropped her crystal wine glass. It slipped through her fingers, hit the edge of her plate, and shattered into dozens of pieces. Expensive red wine splattered all over her pristine white silk blouse and soaked into the expensive table linen, but she did not even notice the stain. She collapsed backward into her dining chair, clutching her chest with both hands as if she were having a heart attack. Her eyes were wide with unblinking shock, darting wildly between me and the window. Andre was staring out the glass, his jaw clenched so tight I thought his teeth might shatter. As a finance guy, he knew exactly what that car cost and what kind of credit score and liquid income was required to even stand next to it. He looked down at his own luxury watch, suddenly looking very small and entirely inadequate. Brittany was gripping the edge of the mahogany table, her knuckles completely white. Her eyes darted frantically between my plain black dress and the powerful man in the bespoke suit waiting for me outside. The reality that I might not be the broke, unemployed failure they had all convinced themselves I was had just forcefully kicked the front door in. "Have a wonderful evening," I added cheerfully. I turned my back on them and walked out the front door, leaving the relinquishment papers sitting unsigned on the table right next to my mother's spilled wine. The cool night air hit my face as I walked down the concrete steps of the porch. Dominic stood by the passenger side of the Aston Martin. He offered a warm, knowing smile as he opened the heavy swan wing door for me. Before I could step into the rich leather interior of the car, the heavy oak front door of the house flew open behind us. Brittany stormed out onto the porch. Her face was twisted into an ugly mask of pure jealousy and panic. Andre was right behind her, looking frantic. "You are a liar!" Brittany shrieked. She marched down the steps and pointed at the supercar. "There is absolutely no way you own this vehicle. It is a rental. You rented this just to come here and try to make me look bad in front of Mom and Dad." I paused, looking back at my sister with mild amusement. I did not say a word. I let her unravel. "Who paid for this?" Brittany demanded, marching closer. She eyed Dominic. "You are a sugar baby, are you not? That is why you do not have a real job. You are letting some shady criminal finance a fake lifestyle, so you can pretend you are better than us. You are pathetic, Stella. You are truly pathetic." Dominic gently placed his hand on the roof of the car. He did not raise his voice. He did not look angry. Instead, he looked at Brittany with the polite, chilling detachment of a man who dealt with billionaires for a living. "It is fascinating that your mind immediately jumps to fraud and fake lifestyles," Dominic said smoothly, his deep voice carrying easily over the quiet street. "Usually people only accuse others of the exact crimes they are actively committing themselves." Brittany gasped, taking a physical step back as if he had slapped her. Andre pushed past his wife, puffing out his chest, trying to salvage whatever fragile masculinity he had left. "Who the hell do you think you are talking to?" Andre demanded, trying to sound imposing. "I am a director at First National Investment. You do not come to my in-laws' house and insult my wife." Dominic shifted his gaze to Andre. The polite smile vanished, replaced by a cold, calculating stare that made Andre instantly falter. "I know exactly who you are," Dominic replied quietly. "And I know exactly what your bank is currently facing. It is a shame your commercial lending division is bleeding capital so rapidly. I heard your managing partners are practically begging for a buyout to avoid a federal investigation into your missing trust funds. You might want to spend less time worrying about my wife's cars and a lot more time calling your legal team. Enjoy the weekend. It might be your last peaceful one." Andre turned the color of ash, all the arrogant banker bravado completely drained from his body. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. He knew exactly what Dominic was talking about, and the terror in his eyes was unmistakable. Dominic turned back to me, his demeanor instantly softening. "Ready to go?" he asked softly. "More than ever," I replied. I slid into the passenger seat. Dominic closed the door with a solid, satisfying thud, shutting out the sound of Brittany's frantic questioning. He walked around to the driver's side, got in, and pressed the ignition button. The V12 engine roared to life, a mechanical beast waking up in the quiet neighborhood. We pulled out of the driveway, leaving my sister and brother-in-law standing frozen on the sidewalk, engulfed in the exhaust fumes and their own collapsing reality. As the Aston Martin merged onto the dark highway heading back toward the city, I reached into my designer clutch and pulled out my phone. The interior of the car was completely silent, except for the low hum of the engine. I scrolled to a specific contact saved only as Chief Financial Officer and pressed call. The line rang once before it was answered. "Yes, Stella," my CFO said. I looked out the window at the passing city lights, feeling a cold, precise sense of clarity. The days of playing the victim were over. It was time to show them exactly what the unemployed dropout was capable of. "Begin the audit," I said. "I want every single transaction Andre has touched flagged and sent to the federal regulators by Monday morning. Burn it down." "Consider it done," the voice replied. I ended the call and dropped the phone back into my purse. Dominic reached over, taking my hand and giving it a reassuring squeeze. The dominoes had officially been pushed over, and there was absolutely nothing my family could do to stop the crash. The next morning, sunlight streamed into the penthouse Dominic and I shared in downtown Los Angeles. I woke up feeling lighter than I had in over a decade. The heavy burden of trying to win my parents' approval was completely gone. I walked into our marble kitchen to find Dominic already awake pouring 2 cups of black coffee. He did not look up right away. He stared intensely at his sleek tablet resting on the kitchen island. "Good morning," I said, taking a mug from his hand. "You are going to want to see this," Dominic replied, sliding the tablet across the smooth marble counter toward me. "Your sister has been very busy this morning." I looked down at the screen. It was a social media video posted by Brittany just 2 hours ago, and it had already amassed over 500,000 views. She sat in the guest bedroom of her house wearing an oversized sweater to look small and fragile. Her blonde hair was deliberately messy, and her mascara was artfully smudged beneath her eyes to simulate endless crying. She stared into the camera, taking a theatrical breath before she spoke. "Hi, everyone," Brittany said in the video, her voice shaking with fake vulnerability. "I usually only post lifestyle content, but today I need to ask for help. My family is being terrorized. My older sister Stella has completely lost her mind. Last night she showed up at our elderly parents' home with a dangerous man in a rented supercar just to intimidate us. She is trying to force my parents out of their property to fund her illegal lifestyle. She has no job, and she is engaging in sex work to pay for these luxury car rentals and designer clothes to abuse our parents." I took a slow sip of my coffee, watching her squeeze a single forced tear out of her left eye. "I am pregnant," Brittany sobbed to her audience, clutching her stomach. "And the stress of her elder abuse is putting my baby at risk. I have set up a legal defense fund, linked below. Please help us protect our family from her." I paused the video right as the donation link flashed across the screen. I did not feel angry. I actually smiled. Brittany was always her own worst enemy. She had just publicly accused me of prostitution and elder abuse, while simultaneously committing wire fraud by soliciting donations under false pretenses. "Are you okay?" Dominic asked softly, watching my face carefully. "I am perfectly fine," I replied, setting the mug down. "In fact, I have never been better. I need to get to the office." An hour later, I stepped out of the back of my sleek black town car. The morning traffic of the financial district buzzed around me. I was wearing a sharp-tailored navy blue pantsuit that commanded absolute authority. I walked through the revolving glass doors of the towering glass and steel skyscraper that housed Apex Holdings. The security guards in the lobby nodded respectfully as I passed by, completely unaware of the viral video circulating online that claimed I was an unemployed criminal. I swiped my secure access card and stepped into the private executive elevator. It shot up to the 40th floor. When the polished metal doors slid open, I stepped out into the sleek, ultra-modern lobby of my company. The massive brushed steel logo of Apex Holdings gleamed against the dark slate wall. This was the $200 million empire I had built from the ground up while my family thought I was wasting my life. I walked slowly down the quiet carpeted hallway toward my massive corner office. The walls were entirely glass, offering a breathtaking, unobstructed view of the entire Los Angeles skyline. My executive assistant, Megan, was already waiting at my heavy oak desk. She held a thick stack of financial reports, but her face was tight with barely contained fury. "Good morning, Megan," I said smoothly, tossing my purse onto the leather sofa. Megan practically marched over to me. "Good morning, Stella. I have the quarterly projections ready for your review, but we have a massive problem. I saw the video your sister posted. It is trending across 3 different platforms. It is disgusting and completely defamatory." Megan set the reports down, ready to take action. "I have already taken the liberty of drafting an email to our corporate legal team. We can hit her with a massive cease and desist order within the hour. We can file a defamation lawsuit and have the video scrubbed from the internet before lunch. Just give me the word." I walked over to the floor-to-ceiling window, looking down at the tiny cars crawling along the highway far below. A cease and desist would make Brittany panic and delete the video. It would stop the flow of donations. It would limit the damage she was doing to herself. I wanted her to feel invincible. I wanted her to keep digging her own grave in front of millions of people until she could not climb out. I turned back to Megan, my expression completely cold and calculated. No, I replied firmly. Megan blinked, confused. But Stella, she is destroying your reputation to strangers. She is destroying her own life, I corrected. Just tell the legal team to stand down. Do not send a warning. Let her keep the video up. Let her collect the fraudulent donations. Let her build my case for me. While I was finalizing the strategy to let my sister dig her own financial grave, my parents were actively trying to dig mine. Richard and Susan walked through the towering glass doors of Dominic's commercial real estate firm. Desperate to sever my marriage and secure funding for their golden child, they tracked down his business address. They bypassed the marble reception desk, bullying an assistant into showing them his private suite. Dominic was sitting behind his massive walnut desk reviewing architectural blueprints. When the heavy oak doors swung open, Richard and Susan stepped inside. Dominic did not look surprised. He simply closed his blueprints, folded his hands on the desk, and waited for them to speak. Dominic, my father began, sitting down without being invited. We know we did not get off on the right foot last night. Tensions were high. But we are here today because we care about you. We need to warn you about the woman you married. My mother dabbed her perfectly dry eyes with a tissue. She is deeply unwell. Dominic, she whispered with practiced theatrical grief. Stella has always been a deeply troubled girl. She creates wild delusions to cope with her failures. She has a documented history of compulsive lying. We love her, but she is a gold digger. She is only using your wealth to destroy our family. Dominic leaned back in his chair. His face was completely unreadable. Is that so? He asked quietly. Yes, my father said eagerly, leaning forward. You are a highly successful man. You cannot risk your reputation by staying tied to someone so volatile. You need to protect your wealth. If you are looking for a secure place to invest your capital, you should be doing business with real professionals. You should be working with Andre. My father reached into his pocket and pulled out a glossy brochure for First National Investment. He slid it across the desk. Andre is our son-in-law. He is a senior director of risk management. He is stable, brilliant, and part of the real family. If you transfer your commercial holding accounts to his division, he can guarantee you massive returns. It would be a mutually beneficial relationship for men of your caliber. The silence in the office was heavy. My parents sat there with breathless anticipation, genuinely believing their manipulation had worked. They thought they had assassinated my character and secured a massive payday for Andre, all in one move. Dominic looked at the glossy brochure sitting on his desk. Then he let out a low, cold laugh. The sound sent a visible shiver down my mother's spine. It was not a friendly laugh. It was the sound of a predator looking at two very stupid prey. Dominic opened the top drawer of his desk. He did not touch the brochure. Instead, he pulled out a thick red-bordered financial dossier and dropped it onto the table. With a heavy thud, Richard Dominic said, his voice dropping to a dangerous, icy register. Do you have any idea what you are holding in your hand? My father blinked, thoroughly confused. It is an investment portfolio. It is garbage, Dominic corrected sharply. That bank is currently suffocating under $50 million of toxic commercial debt. Their liquidity is completely dried up. As of 8 o'clock this morning, they are officially under a massive federal audit for suspected embezzlement and wire fraud within the Trust Management Division. The very division your son-in-law manages. The color instantly drained from my father's face. My mother gripped the armrests of her chair, her jaw dropping open. Andre is not a brilliant banker, Dominic continued, his eyes locking onto my father with piercing intensity. He is a desperate man, illegally skimming client funds to pay for your daughter's fake bags. He is going to federal prison. And you just walked into my office, insulted my wife, and asked me to hand millions of dollars to a criminal. Dominic stood up to his full height, towering over the desk. He adjusted the cuffs of his suit jacket. his face set in stone. "Stella is the most brilliant, capable woman I have ever met," Dominic said quietly, his voice echoing in the large room. "She built an empire while you treated her like dirt. You have absolutely no idea who you are dealing with, but you are about to find out very soon. Get out of my office. If you ever speak my wife's name again, or if you ever step foot inside my building, I will personally ensure your miserable country club facade is burned to the ground. Get out." My parents scrambled to their feet, absolutely terrified. My father did not even grab the brochure. They quickly ran out the heavy wooden door, while my parents were fleeing from Dominic's office in absolute terror. Andre was sitting in his plush leather chair at First National Investment, completely oblivious to the fact that his entire life was about to implode. His corner office overlooked the bustling financial district, giving him the false sense of superiority he so desperately craved. He was currently busy belittling the people who worked beneath him. A young junior analyst stood nervously in front of Andre's massive mahogany desk, holding a stack of risk assessment files. Andre did not bother looking up from his computer screens as he spoke. "I manage over $50 million in high-yield trust funds." Andre snapped, his voice dripping with venomous condescension. "I do not have the time to hold your hand through basic arithmetic. You are completely useless. Fix this garbage right now, or pack up your desk and get out of my building." The pale junior analyst nodded quickly and ran out of the office, closing the glass door behind him. Andre scoffed and leaned back in his chair, adjusting the cufflinks of his expensive suit. He felt completely invincible. In his arrogant mind, his father-in-law was currently downtown, securing a massive capital injection from Dominic. Once that real estate money hit his division, all of his missing funds would be fully covered. Nobody would ever know he had been skimming money from client trust accounts to pay for Brittany and her luxury shopping sprees. He reached for his coffee, feeling incredibly pleased with himself, when a ping echoed from his computer. A high-priority notification suddenly flashed across the monitor. The bold red subject line made his blood run cold. "Urgent External Federal Audit of Trust Management Division." Andre clicked the email, his hand trembling violently. The message was sent from the Compliance Board of Apex Holdings. Andre read the text of the email and felt the air rapidly leave his lungs. Apex Holdings is launching a forensic audit of all trust accounts managed under the Commercial Lending Division. Federal regulators have been officially notified of severe accounting discrepancies and unauthorized offshore wire transfers. All administrative access for the Director of Risk Management has been permanently suspended, pending a full criminal investigation by federal authorities. Security personnel have been dispatched. Andre stared at the screen, his heart hammering violently against his ribs. Suspended. Criminal investigation. Federal authorities. The terrifying words blurred together in front of his eyes. He slammed his hand onto his keyboard, frantically trying to close the email and open his private digital ledgers. He desperately needed to delete the offshore transfer records. He needed to completely wipe the fake invoices he had created to funnel client money into Brittany's personal checking account before the auditors saw them. He clicked the secure folder on his desktop, but a massive red error message popped up. Access denied. He typed his master administrator password again, his fingers slipping on the plastic keys because his palms were sweating so heavily. Access denied. "You have been locked out by the executive system administrator." No, this cannot be happening," Andre muttered frantically, talking to himself in the empty room. He grabbed his desk phone to call his technology department and demand access, but his line was completely dead. They had already cut all of his communications to the outside world. The audit was not just a warning, it was a carefully planned execution. Absolute panic clawed at his throat. He felt like the heavy glass walls of his office were rapidly closing in on him. He quickly scrolled down to the bottom of the catastrophic email, desperately searching for a contact name or a phone number. He needed a way to negotiate his way out of this nightmare. He needed to know exactly who was pulling the trigger on his lucrative career and his freedom. At the very bottom of the document, right above the official corporate seal of Apex Holdings, was a single digital signature. It read, "Authorized by S. Hayes, Chief Executive Officer of Apex Holdings." Andre stared at the glowing name on the screen. S. Hayes. He had absolutely no idea who that was. In his panicked, arrogant mind, the CEO of a $200 million tech firm had to be some ruthless old billionaire in a bespoke suit looking to strip the bank for parts. He desperately wondered how he could bribe or beg this powerful man for mercy. He wiped the cold sweat from his forehead, completely unaware that S. Hayes was Stella Hayes. He had absolutely no idea that the brilliant billionaire tearing his entire fraudulent existence apart was the very same woman he had just mocked for being an unemployed failure at the family dinner table less than 12 hours ago. Andre did not wait for security to escort him out. He grabbed his keys and ran out of his corner office, sprinting past his confused junior analyst. He took the private elevator down to the parking garage, his breathing heavy and erratic. He needed to get home immediately. He needed to figure out a way to liquidate their remaining assets before the federal regulators froze his personal accounts. He pushed his luxury sedan well past the speed limit on the highway, his mind racing through worst-case scenarios. When he finally pulled into the driveway of their Brentwood house, he slammed the car into park and ran to the front door. He burst into the foyer expecting quiet. Instead, he heard upbeat pop music and Brittany speaking in her fake influencer voice coming from the upstairs guest bedroom. Andre took the stairs two at a time and threw the bedroom door open. The room was blindingly bright, illuminated by three massive ring lights. Brittany was sitting in the center of the floor, surrounded by towering stacks of premium designer shopping bags. She was holding up a glittering diamond necklace to her phone camera, smiling perfectly. "Oh my gosh, you guys!" Brittany squealed. "Retail therapy is exactly what I needed after all the family trauma I shared with you this morning. Thank you so much to everyone who donated to my legal fund. You are helping me protect my unborn baby from my toxic sister." Andre stared at the mountains of luxury boxes, his chest heaving. "Brittany, what did you do?" he demanded, his voice cracking with panic. Brittany tapped the screen of her phone to stop the recording. She rolled her eyes, annoyed by the interruption. "Andre, you ruined the take. I was right in the middle of my luxury unboxing haul. My engagement is through the roof today because of the video I posted about Stella." "How much did you spend today?" Andre yelled, kicking a designer shoebox. "Only $50,000, Brittany said defensively. "I used the emergency black card. I had to look wealthy, Andre. Stella showing up in that Aston Martin was humiliating. If my followers think we are poor, I will lose brand deals. Your big quarterly bonus clears next week, so do not act like we cannot afford it." Andre felt his knees go weak. He staggered forward, grabbing the edge of a makeup vanity. "There is no quarterly bonus, Brittany," he gasped. "There never was a bonus." Brittany scoffed, standing up. "What are you talking about? You manage $50 million. You told me your bonus was guaranteed. I lied to you," Andre screamed, his composure completely shattering. The veins in his forehead throbbed violently. "I have been lying for 2 years. Do you have any idea how much money it takes to fund your fake lifestyle? My salary barely covers our mortgage." Brittany froze, her smug expression dropping. "Then where did all the money come from?" "I stole it!" Andre roared, tears of terror welling in his eyes. "I illegally skimmed money from the high-yield trust funds of my banking clients. Every time you wanted a new closet or a luxury trip, I created fake invoices and wired client money into offshore accounts. I committed federal wire fraud to keep you happy." Brittany stumbled back. "Are you out of your mind? You are a criminal. I am a dead man." Andre corrected, his voice trembling. "I just received an email from Apex Holdings. They are running a forensic federal audit on my specific department right now. They permanently locked me out of the system. I cannot delete the fake invoices. I cannot hide the offshore transfers. The regulators are going to see that I stole millions." Brittany stared at him, her eyes wide with horror. "But what about my credit cards? What about the house?" Andre let out a broken laugh. The house is gone, Brittany. The credit cards are going to be frozen by tomorrow morning. If I lose this job, I do not just go bankrupt. I go to federal prison for 20 years. We need to call my parents. Brittany panicked. They can ask Stella and her rich husband for a loan. They can save us. Andre slumped against the wall, sliding down until he hit the floor. He buried his face in his hands, realizing the absolute magnitude of his disastrous situation. There was no way out of this trap. His blind arrogance and his desperate need to impress people who did not matter had finally caught up to him. He was completely ruined, and it was only a matter of time before the armed federal agents finally arrived at his front door. While Andre was crumbling on the floor of his guest bedroom, I was sitting comfortably in my leather chair at Apex Holdings. The Los Angeles skyline stretched out beyond the glass walls. I was simply allowing the consequences of my family's own greed to finally catch up to them. My assistant Megan knocked twice before opening the heavy door. She walked in carrying a single manila folder and placed it precisely in the center of my desk. "I have the documents you requested regarding the Calabasas property, Stella," she said. I reached out and opened the folder. Inside was the complete financial history of my parents' sprawling mansion. For years, my father Richard and my mother Susan had projected an image of effortless wealth. They hosted lavish parties, joined expensive country clubs, and constantly belittled me for my lack of financial success. But the documents in front of me told the real story. Their entire existence was a carefully constructed house of cards built on massive, unsustainable debt. They had taken out a second mortgage 5 years ago to pay for Brittany's extravagant wedding to Andre. Then they took out a third mortgage to maintain their country club memberships. According to the bank records Megan had acquired, they had not made a single mortgage payment in over 5 months. They were currently drowning in absolute delinquency. "The original lender has been trying to offload this toxic asset for weeks," Megan explained. "Your parents are essentially judgment-proof at this point because their debt-to-income ratio is catastrophic. The bank is thrilled to sell the defaulted mortgage at a discount just to get it off their books." I picked up my favorite brass pen. It was the same brand of pen my father had tried to force me to use the night before when he demanded I sign away my inheritance. I smoothly signed my name on the bottom line of the purchase agreement. With a few strokes of ink, Apex Holdings officially absorbed the debt. I now owned the paper on their Calabasas mansion. I was their sole creditor. "Package the debt legally," I instructed, handing the signed contract back to Megan. "Ensure every single regulatory requirement is met perfectly. I want absolutely no loopholes. Once the transfer is officially recorded, I want you to draft a formal notice of default and intent to foreclose." "Understood?" Megan replied, taking the folder. "How would you like it delivered?" "Send a private legal courier," I said, leaning back in my chair. "Do not use certified mail. I want someone to knock on their front door, look them in the eye, and hand them the documents directly. They have exactly 7 days to vacate the premises before we initiate formal eviction proceedings." Megan nodded, a faint smile playing on her lips. "I will dispatch the courier immediately." Across town, in the quiet, wealthy enclave of Calabasas, my parents were sitting in their expansive living room, completely unaware that the ground beneath them had just collapsed. My father was pacing back and forth across the expensive Persian rug, furiously muttering to himself about how Dominic had treated them at the real estate firm. My mother was sitting on the white velvet sofa, sipping a glass of wine to calm her nerves. They were still trying to figure out how to force me back into submission when the heavy brass knocker on their front door echoed through the quiet house. My father stopped pacing. "Father." He adjusted his collar, assuming it was one of his wealthy neighbors stopping by for a chat. He walked to the foyer and pulled the door open, putting on his best fake smile. Standing on the porch was a tall man in a dark uniform holding a thick sealed envelope. "Richard Hayes, the courier," asked, his voice flat and entirely unamused. "Yes, that is me," my father replied, his smile faltering slightly. "How can I help you?" The courier shoved a digital clipboard toward him. "Sign here to confirm receipt of legal notice." My father frowned but scribbled his signature on the screen. The courier handed him the heavy envelope, turned, and walked back to his vehicle without saying another word. My father closed the heavy door slowly, staring at the return address. It simply read, Apex Holdings Legal Department. "What is it?" Richard, my mother, called out from the living room, sensing the sudden shift. My father tore the thick envelope open and pulled out the crisp legal documents. He scanned the first page and all the color instantly drained from his face. His hands began to shake so violently that the papers rattled. He dropped the envelope onto the cold marble floor. Apex Holdings had just bought their house, and they were now facing immediate eviction. My parents were staring at the foreclosure notice from a faceless corporation named Apex Holdings, completely unaware that the chief executive officer pulling the strings was their own daughter. The sheer terror of losing their Calabasas mansion finally broke their arrogant facade. They realized they needed a massive amount of money instantly. In their twisted logic, Andre was still their golden goose, but Dominic had just informed them that Andre's bank was collapsing under a federal audit. So they hatched a desperate plan. They needed my wealthy husband to save Andre, so that Andre could somehow save them from eviction. Less than an hour after the courier left their porch, my cell phone buzzed on my desk. I looked down at the screen. It was my mother. I had not blocked her number yet because I knew this exact call was coming. I pressed accept and put her on speakerphone. "Stella, sweetheart." My mother cooed, her voice dripping with a sickly, sweet, fake warmth that made my stomach turn. "We really need to see you. Can we meet for coffee? Just the three of us." I arranged to meet them at an upscale cafe in Beverly Hills later that afternoon. I arrived 10 minutes early, ordered a matcha latte, and chose a secluded booth in the back. I set my phone face down on the marble table, secretly turning on the voice recorder app. I wanted every single word of their manipulation documented. My parents walked through the glass doors a few minutes later. Despite wearing their usual designer clothes, they looked completely unraveled. My father had dark circles under his eyes, and my mother's hands were noticeably shaking as she clutched her expensive purse. They slid into the booth across from me, instantly turning on the charm. "Stella, you look absolutely beautiful." My mother began reaching across the table to try and hold my hand. I smoothly pulled my hand back and picked up my cup. She did not miss a beat, launching straight into her toxic positivity routine. "We missed you so much today. We know tensions were a little high at dinner last night, but we just want to put all of that negative energy behind us. We need to vibrate on a higher frequency and focus on love and forgiveness. Family is the most important thing in the world." I stared at her over the rim of my cup. It was genuinely fascinating to watch them pivot from screaming at me to leave their house forever to playing the roles of loving parents. "Your mother is right," my father chimed in, leaning forward with a serious, pleading expression. "We are a family, and family sticks together when things get tough. And right now, things are very tough." Dominic mentioned some troubling rumors about Andre's bank this morning. We did some asking around, and it seems there is a misunderstanding with some federal regulators. "A misunderstanding," I repeated flatly. "Yes, exactly." My mother nodded frantically. "Andre is a brilliant man, but the bank is just experiencing a temporary liquidity issue. If they do not secure a bridge loan immediately, the entire commercial division could be shut down. Andre could lose his job, and poor Brittany is practically sick with worry over her pregnancy." My father cleared his throat, getting to the actual point of their performance. "Stella, we need you to talk to Dominic. He is a very wealthy, powerful man. He has the capital to stop this crisis. We need you to beg him to inject funds into Andre's department. It would only be a temporary loan. It would save Andre's career, and it would keep our family from falling apart." I took a slow sip of my latte, letting the silence stretch between us. "You want me to beg my husband to bail out the man who insulted me at dinner last night? You have to be the bigger person," Stella, my mother, pleaded, her eyes wide with fake maternal desperation. "You have to let go of your petty jealousy. If Andre goes down, Brittany loses her home. And honestly, your father and I just received a very confusing, terrifying letter from a corporate holdings company about our mortgage. We need Andre to keep his high-paying job so he can help us navigate this legal mess. You owe us this, Stella. We raised you. We gave you everything. You cannot let your own family be destroyed when you have the power to stop it. I sat perfectly still, letting the voice recorder capture every single pathetic manipulative word. They were not apologizing. They were not taking accountability. They were actively demanding that I leverage my marriage to fund a criminal enterprise just to save their fake high society image. The absolute sheer audacity of their gaslighting was incredibly impressive, but it was not going to work ever again. I let them finish their desperate monologue before I finally set my cup down on the marble table, ready to drop the hammer. I held up my hand, silencing my mother, right as she prepared to launch into another tearful plea about family unity. The sudden gesture made her snap her mouth shut so fast her teeth clicked together audibly. I reached into my structured leather designer tote bag sitting on the seat next to me and pulled out a thick, crisp manila envelope. I placed it gently on the cool marble surface of the table, resting my fingertips lightly on the edges. You are both operating under a massive delusion, I said, my voice barely above a whisper, but laced with absolute unyielding authority. You seem to believe that Dominic is the one you need to fear. You think he is the powerful man holding the keys to your salvation. You think if you just manipulate me enough with fake maternal love, I will run home and beg my rich husband to fix your disastrous mistakes. My father shifted uncomfortably in the booth, his eyes darting down to the envelope. Stella, we are just asking for a bridge loan. Dominic has the capital to stop this crisis. It is a simple business transaction that benefits everyone. Dominic does not care about your son-in-law, I replied coldly. And Dominic has absolutely nothing to do with why you are sitting here today. I do. I pushed the heavy manila envelope across the smooth marble table until it bumped gently against my father's ceramic coffee cup. He stared at it as if it were a live explosive device. Go ahead, I instructed. Open it. My father hesitated, his fake confidence completely dissolving. He reached out with trembling fingers, popped the metal clasp, and pulled out the thick stack of legal documents. He unfolded them, his eyes scanning the bold black text at the top of the first page. I watched the exact moment his brain registered what he was looking at. The remaining color drained from his face, leaving him looking pale, sickly, and suddenly very old. What is it, Richard? My mother demanded, grabbing his arm tightly. What does it say? My father swallowed hard, his voice barely a rasp. It is the deed to our house. My mother snatched the papers from his hands, her eyes widening frantically as she read the dense legal jargon. This is a mistake, she stammered, looking up at me in absolute panic. We just received a foreclosure notice from a company called Apex Holdings an hour ago. Why do you have these documents, Stella? Where did you get this? Did you steal this from Dominic? I leaned back in the booth, crossing my arms over my chest. I did not steal anything from anyone. I bought your bad debt. My parents stared at me in complete uncomprehending silence. Their minds simply could not process the words I was saying. Let me explain this to you in very simple terms, so there is absolutely no confusion, I continued smoothly. For the past 5 months, you have failed to make a single payment on your third mortgage. You have been drowning in toxic debt just to keep up the appearance of wealth at your country club while you mocked me for being unemployed. The original lender was desperate to offload your delinquent account, so my company purchased it. Your company, my father whispered, shaking his head in denial. You do not have a company. You dropped out of medical school. You do not have a real job. I am the founder and chief executive officer of Apex Holdings. I stated the words, tasting like absolute victory. The tech startup I built in my bedroom 10 years ago while you called me a failure is now a $200 million financial technology firm. Dominic is not the one auditing Andre. I am. Dominic is not the one foreclosing on your Calabasas mansion. I am. I own your debt. I own your house. I am your sole creditor. The realization hit them like a physical blow to the chest. My mother dropped the papers back onto the table, her hands flying to her mouth. She looked at me not as her daughter, but as a terrifying stranger who held her entire life in her hands. My father looked completely broken, his arrogant posture collapsing into the plush leather of the restaurant booth. "You cannot do this to us." My mother gasped, tears of genuine terror welling in her eyes. "We are your parents, Stella. We gave you life. You cannot throw us out on the street." "You threw me out of your house last night," I reminded her softly. "You told me never to come back. I am simply returning the favor." Inside that envelope is a formal notice of default and intent to foreclose. Because your debt-to-income ratio is entirely unrecoverable, there is no negotiation. There is no payment plan. You have exactly 7 days to pack your fake luxury bags and vacate the premises. 7 days? My father choked out, his eyes wide with horror. "We cannot pack up a 10,000 square foot house in 7 days. Where are we supposed to go?" "You should ask Brittany," I suggested with a cold, unforgiving smile. "She has a lovely 4-bedroom house in Brentwood. Oh wait, she will be losing that soon too, because her husband is going to federal prison for stealing client funds. It looks like you are all going to have to find a very small apartment together." The air in the cafe felt incredibly thin. I could hear the soft jazz music playing overhead, a stark contrast to the absolute financial execution happening inside our booth. They were finally realizing that the daughter they threw away was the only person who could have saved them, and she had absolutely no intention of doing so. The heavy silence stretched for a few agonizing seconds as the harsh reality of my words finally penetrated their thick entitlement. Then the carefully constructed mask of the loving mother shattered. Susan's face contorted into pure rage. The pleading tears vanished, replaced by a vicious glare. She realized I was not bluffing. I held the deed to her beloved mansion, and I was going to throw her out onto the street. "You little monster," my mother hissed, her voice vibrating with venom. "After everything we have done for you, you think you can just buy our house and kick us out? We will sue you. We will take you to court for everything you have. We will expose your tech company to the press and tell the world what a psychotic, ungrateful daughter you are." I simply looked at her, completely unmoved by her empty threats. "You cannot afford a lawyer, Susan," I stated calmly. "You cannot even afford the coffee you are drinking right now." That pushed her over the edge. With a sudden shriek, my mother stood up. She grabbed her large plastic cup of iced coffee and hurled the entire thing directly at me. The heavy cup bounced off my chest, and the freezing liquid exploded all over my tailored navy pantsuit. The ice cubes clattered loudly against the marble table and scattered across the pristine hardwood floor of the upscale cafe. The entire restaurant went dead silent. The soft jazz music overhead was suddenly the only sound in the room. Every wealthy patron, every waiter, and the manager stopped what they were doing and turned to stare at the chaotic scene. My mother was standing there, breathing heavily, pointing a shaking finger at me. "You are dead to us," she screamed, abandoning any shred of high society decorum. "Do you hear me, Stella? You are dead to us. I wish you had never been born. You are nothing but a jealous, bitter mistake." I did not scream back. I did not cry. I did not flinch. I slowly reached across the table, picked up a linen napkin, and began calmly dabbing the spilled coffee off my lapel. I looked up at her, my expression completely blank, and then I raised my index finger, pointing toward the ceiling right above our booth. My mother frowned, her eyes following my finger. Nestled in the corner of the ceiling, pointed directly at our table, was a sleek black security camera with a glowing red light. "Thank you for that," I said, my voice cutting through the silent cafe. I was wondering how I was going to justify a permanent restraining order during the eviction process, but you just handed me criminal assault evidence on a silver platter. My legal team will pull the security footage from the manager before the end of the day. My father, who had been sitting frozen in shock, suddenly snapped back to reality. The word criminal broke his paralysis. He realized they were not just losing their house, but his wife was about to be arrested for battery in Beverly Hills. "Susan, stop it," my father hissed, grabbing her arm violently. "We need to leave, right now." He practically dragged her out of the booth. My mother stumbled, her designer heels slipping on the ice cubes she had thrown. They looked completely unhinged. The sophisticated wealthy couple who had proudly walked into the upscale cafe 10 minutes ago was completely gone, replaced by desperate, humiliated people fleeing the scene of a crime. They hurried toward the glass exit doors, keeping their heads down, as the restaurant watched them leave in disgrace. I remained sitting comfortably in the leather booth, slowly sipping the rest of my matcha latte and carefully watching them through the large storefront window. They marched up to the automated parking kiosk on the sidewalk to retrieve their luxury sedan. My father aggressively punched his ticket into the machine. The screen prompted him for a $20 parking fee. He pulled out his premium metal credit card and slid it into the reader with arrogant force. He waited for the gate to lift. The machine beeped loudly. A bright red message flashed across the digital screen. "Declined." My father froze. He pulled the card out, rubbed the chip on his jacket, and shoved it back in. The machine beeped again. "Declined." Panic washed over his face. He quickly opened his wallet, his hands shaking, and pulled out a different credit card from another bank. He swiped it. Beep. Declined. I smiled softly to myself from inside the cafe. The financial freeze had officially begun. The web of defaulted loans and frozen assets was tightening around them, and they did not even have $20 to their name to escape the parking lot. I watched my parents argue by the parking kiosk before my father pulled a crumpled $20 bill from his pocket. The wooden barrier lifted and their luxury sedan sped out into traffic, disappearing. They were running back to a mansion they no longer owned, armed with empty wallets. I finished my drink, left a tip, and signaled my driver to take me back to the office. Meanwhile, on the other side of the city, absolute chaos had fully consumed my sister's household. The financial freeze Dominic and I had initiated was executing flawlessly. Andre's bank accounts were officially frozen by federal regulators pending the embezzlement investigation. Brittany's pristine emergency credit cards were being declined one by one. She was entirely cut off from the stolen trust funds that had fueled her fake influencer empire. But a narcissist backed into a corner does not surrender. They double down. Desperate for an immediate influx of cash, Brittany grabbed her phone and her ring light. She locked herself in her primary bathroom, wrapping a white towel around her shoulders to simulate a sterile hospital gown. She aggressively rubbed her eyes until they were bloodshot and puffy. Then she hit record. "Hey everyone," Brittany whispered into the camera, her voice trembling with perfectly manufactured terror. "I am making this video from the emergency room. The extreme psychological abuse and targeted financial attacks from my sister Stella have completely overwhelmed my body. My blood pressure spiked to dangerous levels, and I started experiencing severe cramping. The doctors are terrified I might lose the baby." She paused, letting a single tear roll down her cheek. The acting was genuinely Oscar-worthy. "My husband is currently dealing with corporate sabotage orchestrated by Stella to ruin his career, so we are fighting battles on all fronts." Brittany sobbed. "I am terrified. I just want my baby safe." I linked a GoFundMe below for my emergency medical expenses and to retain a lawyer to get a permanent restraining order against my sister. "Please pray for my unborn child." She uploaded the video and pushed it to her social media platforms. Within minutes, her followers, blind to the reality of her criminal household, began flooding the page with sympathy. The GoFundMe counter began to rapidly tick upward. $5 here, $20 there, then more. Back in Calabasas, my parents were sitting in the dark living room of their foreclosed mansion. They had not spoken a word to each other since fleeing the cafe. My mother was scrolling mindlessly on her phone, trying to escape the reality of their impending eviction when Brittany's new video popped up on her feed. "Richard," my mother gasped, the color draining from her face for the second time that day. "Look at this. Stella put Brittany in the hospital. She is going to lose the baby." My father snatched the phone, watching his golden child weep from her luxurious bathroom, completely convinced she was sitting in a hospital ward. Panic gripped his chest. In their twisted minds, this unborn child was the only pure, untainted thing left in their crumbling legacy. They genuinely believed that if they could just save Brittany and the baby, they could salvage their family image. "We have to help her," my mother cried hysterically. "We cannot let Stella destroy our grandchild. How much money do we have left in the joint checking account?" My father pulled up their mobile banking app on his phone. Between the blocked credit cards and the defaulted loans, they had exactly $12,000 left in liquid cash. It was the absolute last of their survival money. It was the money they desperately needed to rent a cheap apartment or hire a moving truck when my 7-day eviction notice expired. "Send it all to her," my mother demanded without a single second of hesitation. "We will figure out the house later. Our grandchild is in danger. We have to be the heroes here." My father nodded grimly. With a few desperate taps on his screen, he transferred their entire remaining life savings directly into Brittany's GoFundMe campaign. The digital balance on their bank account dropped to zero. They were now entirely destitute. Sitting at my desk at Apex Holdings, I watched the massive anonymous donation hit Brittany's crowdfunding page. My assistant Megan stood next to me, holding a tablet displaying the transaction origin. "That $12,000 donation just came from your parents' joint account," Megan confirmed, shaking her head in disbelief. "They just gave away their absolute last dollar to a fake medical fund." I smiled coldly, turning my attention back to the glowing screen of my computer monitor. "Good," I replied softly. "Now they have absolutely nothing left to fall back on when the real truth finally comes out soon." Scarcely an hour after my parents emptied their bank account for a fake medical fund, my secure office phone rang. The receptionist downstairs informed me that a gentleman was here to see me. I authorized his entry. A few minutes later, the heavy glass door to my office swung open. In walked Donovan, a highly sought-after private investigator I had retained the morning after the disastrous family dinner. Donovan was a former intelligence officer who specialized in high-level corporate espionage and deep background checks for elite clients. He did not waste time with pleasantries. He walked straight to my desk and set down two thick, leather-bound dossiers. "Everything you asked for is right here," Stella Donovan said, his voice low and strictly professional. "It is honestly worse than you predicted. Your brother-in-law is not just skimming off the top. He is running a massive, fully coordinated wire fraud operation." I pulled the first dossier toward me. It was stamped with a red confidential seal. I opened it and immediately saw the finalized audit reports from my internal team, heavily corroborated by external banking records Donovan had acquired. It laid out Andre's entire criminal enterprise in black and white. Over the past 24 months, Andre had systematically drained exactly $4.2 million from 3 different high-yield trust funds. He used a complex web of fake vendor invoices to funnel the cash into an offshore account in the Cayman Islands, which was directly linked to Brittany's personal checking account. "The Federal Bureau of Investigation already has these exact documents," Donovan explained, tapping the file. "Your compliance team officially handed the audit over to the Financial Crimes Division this morning. The feds have frozen his passport, and a federal judge just signed the arrest warrants an hour ago. They are just waiting for the right moment to execute the raid." I closed the financial file, feeling a dark sense of satisfaction. Andre was mathematically and legally finished. I slid the second dossier toward me. This one was considerably thinner, but it held the most explosive personal secret of all. "Tell me about the pregnancy," I commanded softly. Donovan let out a short, cynical laugh. "There is no pregnancy. There never was. Your sister is not carrying a child. She is recovering from extensive cosmetic surgery." I opened the file and stared at the medical records Donovan had pulled from a luxury private clinic in Beverly Hills. The timeline was laid out with absolute precision. Exactly 3 weeks ago, Brittany checked herself into the clinic under an alias. She paid $35,000 in cash stolen from Andre's offshore accounts for a full mommy makeover. She had an extensive tummy tuck and aggressive liposuction on her waist and thighs. According to the clinic notes, Donovan continued, she is currently experiencing severe post-operative swelling and moderate infection due to poor aftercare. That is why she is bloated. That is why she is wearing baggy clothes and complaining of severe abdominal cramping on her videos. She is not having a miscarriage, Stella. She is having complications from a vanity procedure. I looked at the glossy photographs included in the file. They showed Brittany walking into the cosmetic clinic, her face hidden behind oversized designer sunglasses. Next to those photos was a copy of the fake ultrasound picture she had texted to my parents last week. Donovan's report proved the ultrasound image was purchased from a novelty website for $14. This means her new online fundraiser is completely fraudulent, I noted, tracing the edge of the fake ultrasound photo. Yes, Donovan confirmed. She is committing federal wire fraud across state lines by soliciting money for a fake medical emergency. When the authorities find out, she is going to be facing her own set of felony charges right alongside her husband. Thank you, Donovan, I said, closing the final folder. Your payment has already been wired to your account. Donovan nodded respectfully and left the office, leaving me alone with the absolute destruction of my family perfectly documented on my desk. I sat back in my chair, staring out at the sprawling city skyline. I had all the weapons I needed. I had the foreclosure deed. I had the proof of Andre's massive embezzlement. And I had the absolute proof that Brittany's pregnancy was a disgusting, manipulative scam to steal money from strangers. The only thing left to do was choose the perfect battlefield. I opened my digital calendar and clicked on Saturday evening. The annual city charity gala was scheduled to take place at the Grand Ballroom downtown. It was the most important social event of the year for the wealthy elite. My parents and my sister had bought their tickets months ago, desperate to be seen among high society. It would be the ultimate stage for their final public execution. I picked up my phone to call Dominic, ready to plan our grand entrance. Saturday evening arrived with the crisp elegance that only a Los Angeles winter could provide. The annual city charity gala was being held at the Grand Ballroom of the historic downtown hotel. It was the absolute pinnacle of high society networking. Valets in crisp white jackets rushed to open the doors of expensive luxury vehicles, while photographers flashed blinding lights at the city elite walking up the plush crimson carpet. Inside, the massive ballroom dripped with crystal chandeliers, towering floral arrangements of white orchids, and the quiet, heavy hum of generational wealth. For my family, this opulent room was not a celebration. It was a desperate, terrifying battlefield. They had purchased their non-refundable tickets 6 months ago, back when they still believed their financial lives were secure. Now those tickets were the only things keeping them connected to a world they were rapidly falling out of. My parents walked through the gilded doors first. They were trying desperately to project their usual arrogant confidence, but the facade was visibly cracking under the weight of their impending eviction. My father, Richard, was sweating profusely. His tuxedo collar looked incredibly tight, and his eyes darted nervously around the room, hunting for any vulnerable investor he could manipulate into a predatory bridge loan. My mother, Susan, was clutching his arm with a rigid, painful grip. She was wearing a dark emerald gown from 3 seasons ago, hoping the dim lighting would hide the fact that she could no longer afford current designer collections. Her smile was incredibly brittle, her jaw clenched so tight it looked painful. They had exactly $0 in their bank account, having drained their final savings for Brittany and her fake medical emergency. They were literally standing in a room full of billionaires with completely empty pockets. A few steps behind them walked Brittany and Andre. If my parents looked desperate, my sister and her husband looked like they were walking directly to the gallows. Andre was pale, his skin taking on a sickly gray hue under the bright ballroom lights. He was constantly checking his cell phone, jumping at every slight vibration, absolutely terrified that it was the authorities calling to freeze his final hidden accounts. He knew the federal audit was closing in rapidly, and the sheer terror of a lengthy federal prison sentence was eating him alive from the inside out. Brittany was walking stiffly beside him, her face heavily contoured with expensive makeup to hide her absolute exhaustion. She was wearing a massive, shapeless black gown that completely swallowed her figure. To the untrained eye of a stranger, it looked like a conservative maternity dress designed to protect her delicate pregnancy. But I knew the undeniable truth. It was a desperate attempt to conceal the severe swelling and heavy surgical bandages from her botched tummy tuck. She winced slightly with every step she took, the physical pain of her cosmetic surgery perfectly matching the agonizing reality of her collapsing online influencer empire. The four of them huddled together near a towering ice sculpture completely ignored by the truly wealthy patrons floating effortlessly past them. They grabbed glasses of complimentary champagne from passing waiters, downing the expensive alcohol far too quickly. "Richard, you need to talk to William Vance," my mother hissed quietly, nodding toward a silver-haired venture capitalist standing by the bar. "Go pitch him Andre and his portfolio. Tell him we just need a temporary cash injection. Do whatever it takes to save us." My father smoothed his lapels and forced a wide, completely fake smile. He grabbed Andre by the elbow and dragged him across the polished ballroom floor. They cornered the wealthy investor, aggressively launching into a desperate sales pitch. From across the room, it was agonizing to watch them fail. Andre was stammering, his usual arrogant banking charm completely destroyed by panic. My father was gesturing wildly, talking way too fast. The investor listened for exactly 30 seconds before his polite smile vanished completely. He took a deliberate step back, looking at Andre with a mixture of profound pity and absolute disgust. The dark rumors regarding the federal audit had already started whispering through the high society grapevine earlier that afternoon. The elite crowd could smell the toxic debt radiating off my brother-in-law. The investor offered a brief dismissive excuse and quickly walked away, leaving my father and Andre standing completely alone in the middle of the crowded ballroom, utterly humiliated. Andre stared down at his empty champagne flute, his hands shaking violently. "It is over, Richard," Andre whispered, his voice cracking. "Nobody is going to give us a single dime. They all know." My father looked around the glittering room. The eviction was coming. The federal arrests were coming. They were completely out of available options. Just as the sheer hopelessness of their situation settled over my family, a sudden ripple of energy swept through the grand ballroom. The quiet hum of high society conversation paused. Heads turned toward the gilded entrance doors. Photographers outside flashed their cameras in a rapid, blinding frenzy. The heavy mahogany doors swung open wide, and Dominic and I stepped into the room. We looked like we owned the entire building. I was wearing a custom-tailored emerald silk gown that cascaded perfectly to the floor. It was a masterpiece of understated wealth, pairing effortlessly with the brilliant diamond drop earrings resting against my neck. Dominic stood tall beside me in a midnight black tuxedo, radiating the kind of quiet, absolute power that commanded instant respect from everyone in the room. As we walked down the sweeping marble staircase into the main ballroom, the wealthy elite naturally parted to make way for us. Important politicians and elite venture capitalists immediately smiled and raised their glasses in our direction. We were the apex predators in a room full of sharks, and everyone knew it. From my peripheral vision, I spotted my family standing frozen near the ice sculpture. My mother looked as though she had seen a ghost. Her eyes were wide, taking in the undeniable reality that the daughter she had mocked for being broke was currently the most powerful woman in the room. Brittany gripped her champagne flute so hard her knuckles turned completely white. Her face twisted into a mask of pure, unadulterated jealousy. She was standing there in her baggy black dress, watching her own high society dreams violently slipping away while I lived them. Dominic placed a warm hand on the small of my back. "Let me get you a drink," he murmured, kissing my cheek. I smiled and nodded, turning to greet the mayor of the city, who was eagerly walking toward me. Dominic glided across the ballroom floor toward the main bar. The bartender immediately abandoned his other patrons to serve him. But before Dominic could order, a frantic, sweaty figure stepped into his personal space. It was Andre. Andre had consumed at least 4 glasses of champagne in the last 20 minutes. His expensive suit was wrinkled, his tie was slightly crooked, and he smelled strongly of alcohol and raw fear. He grabbed the mahogany bar to steady himself, leaning too close to my husband. Dominic Andre slurred slightly, attempting to force a friendly smile. "Listen, we got off on the wrong foot the other night. Stress from the pregnancy, you know how it is. But we are family, and we need to talk business." Dominic did not even look at him. He kept his eyes on the bartender, ordering a sparkling water and a neat bourbon. Andre swallowed hard, his desperation overriding his embarrassment. "Listen to me, Dominic," he pleaded, his voice dropping to a frantic whisper. "My commercial division is facing a tiny liquidity crunch. It is just a minor accounting error, nothing serious, but the regulators are overreacting. If you could just front me a temporary bridge loan, $2 million, just for 30 days to balance the ledgers, I will pay you back with a massive interest rate." Dominic took the crystal glass of bourbon from the bartender. He took a slow, deliberate sip. Then he finally turned his head to look at Andre. The expression on Dominic's face was utterly devoid of human warmth. "An accounting error." Dominic repeated, his voice dangerously low. "Yes, exactly." Andre nodded vigorously, sweating profusely under the ballroom lights. "Just a small oversight." Dominic stepped slightly closer. "You are a terrible liar," Dominic said smoothly. "An accounting error is a misplaced decimal point. Systematically creating fake vendor invoices to wire over $4 million of client trust funds into a shell account in the Cayman Islands to pay for your wife's cosmetic surgeries and fake designer bags is not an error. It is a federal felony." Andre physically recoiled. His mouth opened, but absolutely no sound came out. The blood drained from his face so fast he looked like a corpse. "You thought you were the smartest man in the room," Dominic continued, his voice slicing through Andre's drunken haze. "You sat at my father-in-law's dining table and mocked my wife. You bragged about your massive intellect while you were actively committing wire fraud. Did you really think no one would ever notice the missing millions?" "I do not know what you are talking about," Andre stammered, his eyes darting around the bar in sheer panic. Dominic smiled coldly. "Save it for the federal judge, Andre. Apex Holdings finished their audit yesterday. The Financial Crimes Division has your fake invoices. You are not getting a bridge loan. You are going away." While Dominic was delivering the final crushing blow to Andre at the bar, I was standing near the center of the ballroom, completely surrounded by the city elite. The mayor was enthusiastically discussing a new tech initiative, and several prominent board members of major philanthropic organizations were hanging on my every word. I was not just a guest in this room, I was the gravitational center of it. But from across the sea of tailored tuxedos and designer gowns, a pair of incredibly bitter eyes was locked directly onto me. Brittany stood alone near a towering floral arrangement, her knuckles practically turning translucent as she gripped her champagne flute. She had watched her husband stumble away from Dominic, looking like a ghost, but her narcissistic mind completely ignored Andre's obvious panic. Instead, her entire reality was consumed by the sight of me. In her twisted, deeply entitled brain, there was absolutely no logical way I had earned this level of respect. She convinced herself that I was nothing more than a glorified +1, a pathetic trophy wife playing dress-up with Dominic's money. To Brittany, I was still the unemployed medical school dropout who did not deserve to breathe the same air as her. The physical pain from her hidden cosmetic surgery was throbbing beneath her heavy black dress, making her even more irritable and reckless. She looked down at her own cheap outfit, completely maxed out credit cards, and crumbling fake influencer empire. Then she looked back at my custom emerald gown and the sparkling diamonds resting against my collarbone. The sheer, overwhelming jealousy mutated into a blinding rage. If she was going to lose her house and her status, she was absolutely going to make sure I lost my wealthy husband and my fake high society reputation tonight. Brittany decided right then and there to deploy the ultimate manipulative weapon. She was going to use the charity gala itself to publicly annihilate me. A few minutes later, the gentle chiming of a crystal glass echoed through the grand ballroom. The orchestra stopped playing. The host of the evening, a prominent local philanthropist, stepped up to the glowing acrylic podium on the main stage. He adjusted the microphone and gave a brief, heartwarming speech about the importance of family community support and helping those in desperate need during the holiday season. The wealthy crowd clapped politely, their attention focused entirely on the front of the room. This was the exact opening Brittany was waiting for. Operating on pure, unfiltered delusion, she set her empty glass on a passing waiter's tray and began marching toward the stage. She deliberately pushed her shoulders forward and placed one hand protectively over her flat stomach, playing the role of the frail, abused pregnant woman to absolute perfection. I watched her move through the crowd from my spot near the center of the room. My parents, who were standing frozen near the ice sculpture, suddenly noticed her marching toward the spotlight. My mother gasped, realizing what her golden child was about to do, but she made absolutely no move to stop her. In fact, a sick glimmer of hope flashed across my mother's face. She genuinely believed that if Brittany exposed me as a monster in front of Dominic and his wealthy peers, I would be socially destroyed and forced to hand over my money to silence them. Brittany reached the edge of the stage. The host had just finished his closing remarks and was preparing to introduce the evening's musical entertainment. Without a single shred of hesitation or basic social decency, Brittany climbed the 3 carpeted steps. The host looked startled as this heavily made-up woman in a baggy black dress suddenly invaded his space. "Excuse me," Brittany said loudly, her voice echoing slightly before she even reached the podium. "I am so sorry to interrupt this beautiful evening, but I have a severe family emergency that the people in this room need to know about." She stepped directly in front of the host and grabbed the heavy silver microphone from its stand. The entire ballroom fell into a stunned, uncomfortable silence. Hundreds of billionaires, politicians, and socialites stared up at the stage in absolute confusion. Brittany looked out over the sea of faces, her eyes scanning the crowd until they locked directly onto mine. A wicked, triumphant smirk flashed across her face for a split second before she instantly contorted her features into a mask of pure tragedy. She took a deep, dramatic breath, preparing to tell the entire city that the woman standing beside Dominic was a sociopath who was currently evicting her pregnant sister and her elderly parents onto the streets. It was the perfect setup for her own absolute, brutal, and irreversible public downfall. I just smiled. The high society crowd parted instinctively, sensing the sudden dangerous shift in the atmosphere. Dominic remained standing near the bar, watching me with a look of absolute pride. He knew exactly what was about to happen. I reached the edge of the carpeted stairs and ascended the stage without breaking my stride. The philanthropic host, sensing the escalating family drama, wisely took a step back into the shadows. Brittany noticed me approaching out of her peripheral vision. Her smug expression faltered, replaced by a flash of genuine confusion as I stepped directly into the blinding glare of the stage spotlight. "What are you doing?" Brittany hissed aggressively, lowering the microphone just an inch. "Get off this stage, Stella. This is my moment. You are not going to ruin this for me." She tried to step around me to address the audience again, but I smoothly blocked her path. I did not act crazy or hysterical. I simply reached out and wrapped my hand firmly over hers, forcing the microphone down to her side. My grip was like iron, locking her in place. "You are making a terrible mistake, Brittany," I whispered softly, ensuring only she could hear my final warning. "I am exposing you." Brittany spat back, her eyes wild with narcissistic rage and desperation. "I am going to tell everyone in this room that you are kicking your pregnant sister and your elderly parents out onto the cold street. You are going to be ruined." I stared into her eyes, feeling absolutely no pity for the woman standing in front of me. She had made her choice. Then, by all means, I replied with a chillingly calm smile. "Let us tell them the whole story." I smoothly pried the microphone out of her trembling hands with effortless, undeniable authority. Brittany stumbled back a step, too shocked by my physical confidence to fight back. I turned to face the massive, glittering ballroom. Hundreds of the most powerful people in the city were staring up at the stage, their conversations completely halted. The silence in the room was absolute and deafening. You could hear the faint clinking of ice in crystal glasses from the main bar. I looked down at my parents, who were standing frozen near the ice sculpture, their faces pale with terror. I looked at Andre, who was leaning heavily against a wooden high-top table, completely paralyzed. "Good evening, everyone," I said, my voice projecting through the massive speakers with crisp, unwavering clarity. "I apologize for the sudden interruption to this wonderful charity event. My sister Brittany has been dealing with some severe, undocumented medical issues recently, and her emotional state is incredibly fragile." The crowd murmured softly, a wave of sympathetic curiosity washing over the room. Brittany let out a sharp gasp of outrage behind me, but she was too cowardly to grab the microphone back in front of the elite audience. She desperately wanted an audience, and now I had complete control of the narrative. "Since my sister was so eager to discuss our private family matters tonight, I feel it is only appropriate that we provide you with the full, transparent financial picture." I continued, keeping my tone perfectly conversational and light. I reached into my small designer clutch and pulled out my sleek, ultra-thin tablet. I looked toward the back of the massive ballroom, locking eyes with the lead technician standing in the elevated audiovisual booth. "Switch the main projector input to Terminal 4, I commanded with absolute authority. "Authorize connection now." The technician, recognizing a direct corporate order, scrambled to comply. A heavy mechanical hum vibrated through the ceiling as the massive motorized projector screen slowly descended behind me, covering the intricate floral backdrop of the stage. The bright stage lights automatically dimmed, plunging the front of the room into dramatic shadows. The audience held their collective breath, sensing that they were about to witness something far more scandalous than a simple family argument. Brittany finally realized she was trapped. She frantically looked for the stairs, but the spotlight pinned her to the stage. I tapped the screen of my tablet, loading the weaponized documents ready to burn their empire down. The massive projector screen flared to life, casting a stark white glow over the stage and illuminating the faces of the stunned audience. I tapped the screen of my tablet one final time, and the first document appeared in towering, undeniable high definition behind me. It was the official notice of default, an intent to foreclose from Apex Holdings. The bold red letters at the top of the legal document were impossible to misinterpret. "My parents like to project an image of effortless wealth," I said smoothly, my voice echoing through the silent ballroom. "They look down on anyone who does not meet their financial standards. But the truth is, they have not paid their mortgage in 5 months. The document you see behind me is the foreclosure notice for their Calabasas estate. They are currently drowning in toxic debt, and their bank accounts are completely empty. They are facing mandatory eviction in less than 6 days." A collective gasp rippled through the elite crowd. Several prominent socialites physically stepped away from my parents, as if financial ruin were a contagious disease. My mother covered her face with her hands, letting out a muffled sob of absolute humiliation, while my father stared at the floor, completely defeated. But that is only the beginning of the deception. I continued swiping my finger across the tablet. The screen behind me instantly shifted. The foreclosure notice vanished, replaced by a highly detailed, itemized medical receipt from an exclusive private clinic in Beverly Hills. Next to the receipt were clinical photographs of my sister walking into the facility, wearing oversized sunglasses. Earlier today, my sister posted a tearful video online, claiming she was in the emergency room. I explained, looking directly at Brittany, who was now trembling violently under the spotlight. She begged the public for donations to save her unborn child. She claimed the stress I caused her was threatening her pregnancy. However, the document on the screen proves that Brittany is not pregnant, and she never was. Exactly 3 weeks ago, she paid $35,000 in cash for a comprehensive mommy makeover, including a tummy tuck and extensive liposuction. The swelling she claims is a baby is actually severe post-operative inflammation. Her online fundraiser is nothing more than a calculated fraudulent scam to steal money from sympathetic strangers. The ballroom erupted into furious whispers. The wealthy philanthropists who had dedicated their lives to actual charity were visibly disgusted. Brittany let out a high-pitched wail of despair and buried her face in her hands, realizing that every single person in her high society circle now knew her deepest, most pathetic secret. She was not a wealthy influencer or a grieving mother. She was a scam artist who faked a pregnancy for cash. I let the crowd absorb the shock for a moment before I delivered the final crushing blow. I swiped the tablet one last time. The cosmetic surgery receipt disappeared. In its place appeared a dense, highly redacted federal audit report bearing the official seal of Apex Holdings. You might be wondering how an unemployed lifestyle influencer afforded a $35,000 cosmetic procedure in cash while her parents were facing imminent eviction. I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous, icy register. The answer lies with her husband, Andre. I pointed to the highlighted section of the document displayed on the massive screen. This is a finalized forensic audit from my financial technology firm, completed just yesterday. Over the past 24 months, Andre has utilized his position as a director of risk management to systematically embezzle over $4 million from the high-yield trust funds of his banking clients. The audit definitively traces the stolen funds through a series of fake vendor invoices directly to an offshore account in the Cayman Islands. That account is registered under the personal internet protocol address of Andre, and the money was funneled directly into the checking account of my sister to fund her fake luxury lifestyle. The silence that followed was heavy and suffocating. The elite investors and venture capitalists in the room, many of whom did business with that bank, stared at the stage in absolute horror. They were looking at undeniable proof of federal wire fraud and massive corporate theft. Andre stumbled backward, his back hitting the mahogany bar. He looked like a man who had just been handed a death sentence. These are not family secrets, I concluded quietly, looking out over the sea of shocked faces. These are federal crimes, and I refuse to let these people use my name or my presence in this room to legitimize their fraudulent existence. I lowered the microphone, stepping back from the podium. The truth was finally out in the open, hovering above them all endlessly. The truth was finally out in the open, hovering above them all endlessly. For a fraction of a second, nobody moved. Then the absolute silence shattered. It did not break with a shout or a scream, but with a collective venomous whisper that swept through the grand ballroom like a shockwave. The wealthy elite of the city, people who guarded their reputations more fiercely than their bank accounts, reacted with pure visceral revulsion. It was as if all the oxygen had been sucked out of the room. Down on the main floor, a physical ring of empty space rapidly expanded around my parents. The prominent socialites and wealthy venture capitalists literally took multiple steps backward, treating Richard and Susan as if they were suddenly highly contagious. My mother reached out her hand toward a woman she had played tennis with for 10 years, her eyes pleading for some kind of support. The woman looked at my mother's outstretched hand with absolute disgust, gathered the skirt of her expensive gown, and turned her back completely. My father was hyperventilating. He frantically looked around the room, trying to make eye contact with anyone who would listen to him. He spotted the silver-haired venture capitalist he and Andre had been cornering just 20 minutes ago. The investor did not even look at my father. Instead, the man aggressively pulled his cell phone from his tuxedo pocket, dialed a number, and spoke loudly enough for the surrounding crowd to hear. "Contact the legal department right now," the investor barked into his phone. "Terminate every single pending contract we have with First National Investment and flag Richard as a severe liability. Blacklist them all." Other executives in the room immediately followed suit. The soft glow of dozens of cell phone screens illuminated the dim ballroom as the most powerful people in the city simultaneously scrambled to sever every financial and social tie they had with my family. Years of desperate social climbing, thousands of dollars spent on fake luxury and endless networking were completely vaporized in less than 60 seconds. It was a total, unrecoverable social annihilation. Up on the stage, Brittany finally snapped out of her paralyzed shock. Driven by pure, unhinged narcissism, she refused to accept that her fake empire had just burned to the ground. She lunged forward and grabbed the heavy silver microphone from the podium, her knuckles turning bone white. "It is a lie," Brittany screamed into the microphone, her voice shrill and echoing harshly against the crystal chandeliers. "She is lying to you. Stella is just a jealous, bitter woman. Those documents are fake. She used a computer to forge them because she is obsessed with ruining my perfect life. Look at me. I am a mother. I am carrying a child." She desperately clutched her stomach, trying to invoke the sympathy she had so easily manipulated online. But the elite audience was not composed of gullible internet strangers. They were sharp, ruthless business people who knew exactly what a federal audit document looked like. They looked up at her standing under the bright stage lights in her shapeless black dress. Now that they knew the truth, the facade was incredibly obvious. They could clearly see the stiff, unnatural way she was standing to protect her surgical incisions. They saw the bloated, swollen features of a woman recovering from an invasive cosmetic procedure, not the glowing complexion of an expectant mother. Someone in the front row let out a loud, mocking scoff. Another person yelled for her to get off the stage. The murmurs of the crowd grew louder, morphing from shocked whispers into open, hostile mockery. Brittany stood frozen at the podium, the microphone trembling in her hand, as the terrifying reality finally crushed her. She was the laughingstock of the entire city. She dropped the microphone. It hit the wooden stage with a loud, piercing feedback screech that made everyone in the room wince. She covered her face and ran toward the back curtain, desperate to escape the blinding spotlight. Down below, Andre was leaning against the mahogany bar, completely broken. He was not looking at his wife or my parents. He was staring blankly at the floor, muttering incoherently to himself. The arrogant banking director who had confidently insulted my career just 24 hours ago was completely gone, replaced by a terrified criminal waiting for the inevitable hammer to fall. I calmly walked down the carpeted stairs of the stage, leaving the glowing projector screen behind me. The crowd parted for me once again, but this time there were no polite smiles. There was profound awe and healthy fear. I had publicly dismantled 4 people with surgical precision. I walked straight back to Dominic, who was waiting for me with a proud smile. He reached out, wrapping his arm firmly around my waist, grounding me after the massive adrenaline rush of the stage. The grand ballroom was still vibrating with the chaotic energy of hundreds of wealthy guests, whispering furiously about my family. Richard and Susan were entirely isolated in their own bubble of social exile near the melting ice sculpture, while Andre remained slumped against the mahogany bar, staring into the abyss of his ruined life. The evening had already delivered a catastrophic blow to their fake empire, but the absolute final nail in the coffin was about to be driven home. Suddenly, the heavy velvet drapes covering the massive floor-to-ceiling windows of the grand ballroom were illuminated by violently flashing red and blue lights. The sharp, piercing wail of police sirens cut through the thick glass, drowning out the frantic murmurs of the elite crowd. The high society guests turned their heads toward the street, their eyes wide with fresh shock. Before anyone could even process what was happening outside, the towering gilded doors of the ballroom were thrown open with a loud, commanding crash. A team of 6 men and women walked into the room. 4 of them were federal agents wearing dark, sharp suits, with their gold badges clearly displayed on their belts. They were flanked by 2 uniformed local police officers who kept their hands resting cautiously on their duty belts. The crowd parted immediately, stepping back in absolute silence as the authorities marched onto the plush carpet. The lead federal agent, A tall man with a stern, uncompromising face did not even glance at me or the stage. He already had his target locked. The tactical team moved with swift, terrifying efficiency, walking straight past the elite venture capitalists, the politicians, and the mayor. They headed directly for the main bar, where my brother-in-law was currently hiding. Andre saw them coming. His eyes widened in absolute primal terror as the reality of his stolen millions finally caught up to him. He tried to push himself away from the mahogany counter, perhaps entertaining a fleeting drunken thought of running for the emergency exit, but his legs completely failed him. He stumbled forward awkwardly, knocking over a crystal glass that shattered loudly on the polished hardwood floor. Andre, the lead federal agent, barked, his voice echoing with absolute authority across the entirely silent ballroom. "You are under arrest." The federal agent swarmed him instantly without giving him a single second to run. One agent grabbed Andre by the shoulder and spun him around, slamming his chest roughly against the polished wood of the expensive bar. Andre let out a pathetic gasp as the agent forcefully pulled his arms behind his back. The sharp metallic click of heavy steel handcuffs ratcheting tightly shut around his wrists echoed through the massive room. "You are being charged with multiple counts of federal wire fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy to commit money laundering," the lead agent stated coldly, reading the devastating charges loudly enough for every billionaire and socialite in the room to hear. "You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." Andre did not say a word. The arrogant banking director was completely paralyzed by fear, his tailored tuxedo wrinkling terribly as the federal agents held him down. But the silence was violently shattered by a piercing, hysterical scream from the back of the room. Brittany, who had been hiding behind the heavy stage curtains after her humiliating public defeat, came running across the ballroom floor. "No," Brittany shrieked, her face stained with dark streaks of ruined makeup. She pushed past a group of shocked investors, her baggy black dress flowing awkwardly around her recovering body. "Let him go! You cannot do this to us! We have money. You cannot arrest my husband." A uniformed police officer stepped directly into her path, holding up a massive hand to completely block her from reaching the federal agents. "Ma'am, step back immediately or you will be arrested for interfering with a federal investigation," the officer warned sternly. Brittany slammed into the officer's arms, sobbing uncontrollably. "Andre, do something," she wailed, reaching out toward her husband. "Tell them it is all just a terrible mistake." But Andre just looked at her with dead, empty eyes. The agents pulled him away from the bar, forcing him to walk toward the main exit. The entire high society crowd watched in absolute mesmerized horror as the banking executive, a man who had spent years manipulating them and stealing their trust funds, was paraded through the center of the room in shiny steel handcuffs. He was removed. The heavy gilded doors of the grand ballroom swung shut behind the federal agents, completely cutting off the flashing red and blue lights from the street outside. Andre was gone, swallowed by the justice system he had arrogantly believed he could outsmart. The suffocating silence returned to the room, but this time it was laced with the sharp metallic scent of absolute ruin. My father Richard stood frozen near the melting ice sculpture. He watched the doors close and then his body simply gave out. This was not the theatrical gasping or the fake chest clutching he had used at the dinner table to manipulate me. This was a genuine, terrifying physical collapse. His face turned an alarming shade of gray. He grabbed the lapels of his wrinkled tuxedo, dropping heavily to his knees as a real panic attack seized his chest. He gasped for air, his eyes wide with the realization that he was penniless, socially dead, and facing imminent homelessness. A few hotel staff members rushed over to assist him, but the wealthy guests maintained a strict, disgusted distance. My mother Susan stared at her husband writhing on the floor, and the final illusion of her perfect life completely shattered. She did not drop to the floor to comfort the man she had been married to for 35 years. She did not run to the back curtain to console her golden child Brittany, who was currently hyperventilating in the shadows. Instead, my mother whipped her head around and locked her frantic bloodshot eyes directly onto me. I was standing next to Dominic near the center of the room, looking down at her from the untouchable pedestal I had built with my own hands. Susan stumbled forward. Her expensive heels clattered awkwardly against the polished hardwood floor. She pushed past the mayor and shoved a prominent socialite out of her way, her emerald gown trailing messily behind her. The high society crowd watched in morbid fascination as the once proud matriarch completely unraveled. She reached the space right in front of Dominic and me. Her legs gave way and she collapsed. My mother literally fell to her knees at my feet, the heavy fabric of her dress pooling around her like a deflated balloon. She grabbed the hem of my custom silk gown with trembling, sweaty hands, looking up at me with a face entirely destroyed by terror and desperation. "Stella. Please," my mother sobbed, her voice cracking loudly enough for the entire ballroom to hear. "You have to stop this. You have to fix this. You have hundreds of millions of dollars. You can afford the best defense attorneys in the country. You can pay back the bank. Please use your money to bail Andre out. If he goes to prison, Brittany will have absolutely nothing. The federal government will seize everything they own." She paused, choking on her own tears, her makeup running down her face in dark, ugly streaks. "And the house, Stella, you have to save our house. You own the debt. You can just cancel the foreclosure. Please do not throw your own parents out onto the street. We have absolutely no money left. We gave every single dollar to your sister today. We cannot survive this. We will do anything you want. Just tell us what to do." The sheer volume of her begging echoed off the crystal chandeliers. She was openly demanding that I liquidate my hard-earned assets to cover federal felony theft and wipe out the massive toxic debt she had accumulated solely to pretend she was better than me. I looked down at the kneeling woman clinging to my dress. I did not pull away, but I did not offer my hand to help her up either. I let the city watch her beg. Then the final impossible words finally spilled from her mouth. "We were wrong, Stella," my mother wailed, her voice echoing with absolute defeat. "We were so wrong about you. You are not a failure. You are the successful one. You are the brilliant daughter. You built an empire and we treated you like dirt because we were too blind to see it. You are the only one who has any real power. Please use it to save us. You are our only hope." The admission hung in the air, a public confession of her lifelong cruelty and my victory. For 33 years, I had craved those exact words. I had wanted her to see my worth, to acknowledge my intelligence, to simply love me for who I was, instead of what I could provide. But hearing her say it now, kneeling in her ruined designer dress, while her husband gasped for air and her favorite daughter hid in shame, I felt absolutely nothing. I stared down at my mother, her tear-streaked face looking up at me with a pathetic, desperate hope. She genuinely believed her confession of my worth would unlock my bank accounts. She thought playing the repentant mother would erase decades of emotional abuse and manipulation. But the woman before her was not the frightened girl seeking her approval. That girl died long ago. Dominic placed his hand gently on my shoulder as I looked down at the wreckage of my family. I slowly detached my mother's sweaty fingers from my custom gown. I stepped back, creating a physical boundary between us. "You do not love me, Susan," I said, my voice completely void of emotional warmth. "You love my money. You only respect me now because I hold all the power. If Andre secured a massive bonus today instead of federal handcuffs, you would still call me an unemployed failure." My mother shook her head frantically, fresh tears spilling over her cheeks. "No, Stella, that is not true. We see you now. We know we were wrong. Please just save our house, save our family." I opened my designer clutch. My fingers closed around a folded stack of papers. It was the exact document my father aggressively threw at me across the dining table yesterday. I pulled the papers out and unfolded them. "Yesterday you and Richard demanded I give up my half of Grandma Dorothy's estate," I reminded her, holding the document up so she could see the bold heading. "You demanded I sign away my rights to the Aspen cabin so Brittany could have a larger vacation home. You told me I did not deserve it. My father, who pulled himself up against the melting ice sculpture, stared at the papers with wide, terrified eyes. He was struggling to catch his breath, but the sight of that legal document made him freeze completely. I pulled my brass pen from my clutch. I clicked it open with a decisive snap that echoed loudly in the tense silence. Since you are both facing sudden homelessness and financial ruin, I have decided to grant your wish, I announced, my voice carrying effortlessly across the quiet room. I leaned over a nearby high-top table and flattened the document. With 3 swift, deliberate strokes, I signed my name on the exact line my father pointed to yesterday. I picked up the document and dropped it onto the floor right in front of my mother's knees. There you go, I said softly. I legally relinquish all ownership rights to the Aspen property. The cabin belongs entirely to you and Richard. You own it completely. For a fleeting second, profound, desperate relief washed over my mother's face. She thought I just handed them a lifeline. She thought they could sell the cabin tomorrow and pay off the foreclosure. She reached out with trembling hands to pick up the signed paper. But before you start packing your bags for a ski trip, you should probably know why I was so willing to let it go. I continued, my voice dropping to a surgical whisper. My mother's hand stopped inches from the paper. She looked up at me, the relief instantly morphing back into terror. Grandma Dorothy loved me, I explained calmly. But she was terrible at managing her property taxes. Over the last 10 years, the Aspen cabin accumulated a massive hidden federal tax lien. The property owes exactly $200,000 in back taxes and severe penalties. My father's jaw dropped open. He let out a strangled wheeze. Because I signed over my legal rights, I am no longer liable for a single penny of that debt. I smiled, delivering the final blow. But by accepting full ownership, you and Richard just legally inherited the entire tax lien. The government will collect their $200,000 immediately. And since you gave your last $12,000 to a fake online fund, you are mathematically destroyed. You are completely bankrupt. Enjoy the cabin. The sheer brutality of the trap was absolute perfection. I simply allowed their aggressive greed to transfer the crushing weight onto their shoulders. They demanded I sign that paper to hurt me, unaware they were begging for a live grenade. My father groaned. His banking background allowed his brain to instantly process the inescapable mathematics of their doom. They had no cash. Their primary residence was in foreclosure, and now they owed the government $200,000 they could never pay. My mother stared at the signed paper as if it were a venomous snake. Her hands fell limply to her sides. The fight was drained from her body. The realization that she orchestrated her own absolute destruction was too much to process. She wept in absolute silence. I turned away from my weeping mother, took Dominic by the hand, and walked out of the grand ballroom without looking back. That was the last time I ever spoke to my family. 3 weeks passed. The glittering dust of the charity gala finally settled over the absolute wreckage of their lives, and the consequences of their arrogance were executed with ruthless, undeniable efficiency. The federal judge overseeing Andre's embezzlement case did not share my mother's delusional sympathy. During his initial arraignment, the prosecution presented the mountain of forensic evidence my tech firm had provided. Because Andre had actively wired millions in stolen funds to offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands, the judge immediately declared him an extreme flight risk. Bail was definitively denied without a second thought. The arrogant director of risk management, who used to wear $3,000 bespoke suits, sip imported scotch, and belittle junior analysts, was now sitting in a bleak, windowless concrete cell at the Metropolitan Detention Center. He wore a stiff standard-issue orange jumpsuit that rubbed his skin raw. He spent 23 hours a day listening to the chaotic, terrifying echoes of the cell block, eating terrible institutional food from a plastic tray. He was waiting for a trial that his public defender bluntly warned would inevitably end with a 20-year federal prison sentence. He had traded his freedom, his career, and his entire future just to fund his wife's cosmetic surgeries and designer shoes, and now he had absolutely nothing to show for it except a steel toilet and a thin mattress. The 7-day eviction notice I had served my parents expired exactly on schedule. Without a single dollar to their name and a $200,000 federal tax lien securely anchored around their necks, Richard and Susan were forcibly removed from their Calabasas mansion. The spectacle was everything they had always feared. Wealthy neighbors stood on their perfectly manicured lawns, sipping coffee and watching in hushed amusement as Los Angeles County sheriffs escorted my parents off the property. Aggressive repo men arrived hours later to tow away their least luxury sedans directly from the driveway. The sprawling 10,000 square foot estate they had used to constantly belittle my existence was locked winterized and secured by Apex Holdings. With their credit scores entirely obliterated and their savings gone, they were forced to rent a cramped, depressing 2-bedroom apartment in a noisy, rundown section of the San Fernando Valley. The thin walls offered absolutely no protection from the loud highway traffic outside, and the hallway constantly smelled of stale cigarette smoke. My father spent his days sitting at a cheap plastic folding table, staring blankly at the towering stack of aggressive collection letters from the Internal Revenue Service. My mother sat on a stained thrift store sofa, weeping as she realized every single one of her country club friends had completely blocked her phone number. They were absolute social pariahs. But perhaps the most poetic justice of all belonged to Brittany. The morning after the charity gala, the cell phone footage of my stage presentation leaked online. The internet, which she had so desperately weaponized against me for years, turned on her with terrifying brutal speed. Millions of people watched the undeniable proof that her high-risk pregnancy was a disgusting scam to cover up a tummy tuck. Her comment sections were flooded with pure, unadulterated outrage. Every single brand sponsor dropped her immediately, issuing public statements condemning her behavior. GoFundMe permanently froze her account, refunded all the fraudulent donations, and referred her profile to the authorities. Stripped of her stolen wealth and facing mounting legal fees for her own impending wire fraud charges, she was forced to enter the real workforce for the very first time in her life. The glamorous influencer was currently standing behind the cash register of a discount retail clothing store in a depressing strip mall. She was wearing an itchy, poorly fitting polyester uniform polo shirt and a cheap plastic name tag. Her feet ached horribly from standing on the hard linoleum floor all day. A highly aggressive middle-aged woman slammed a pile of cheap, tangled sweaters onto the counter, glaring at my sister. The customer aggressively demanded a full cash refund for clothes that clearly lacked a receipt and smelled strongly of cheap perfume. When Brittany quietly tried to recite the strict store policy, the woman leaned forward and began screaming directly into her face, calling her incredibly stupid, incompetent, and lazy. In the past, Brittany would have thrown a massive tantrum and demanded to speak to a manager to get the woman fired. But now she simply stood there, her hands shaking violently as she absorbed the vicious verbal abuse. She keyed in the manager override code and processed the refund, blinking back hot tears of absolute humiliation. She had finally become the exact kind of working-class person she had spent her entire life mocking, and she was trapped there forever. Far away from the fluorescent lights of that depressing strip mall, the world looked entirely different. The late afternoon sun was beginning its slow, majestic descent over the horizon, casting a brilliant wash of liquid gold, burnt orange, and deep violet across the endless expanse of the Pacific Ocean. The coastal air was crisp and clean, carrying the sharp, refreshing scent of salt water and absolute freedom. The aggressive, unmistakable growl of the twin-turbo Phi 12 engine purred smoothly as Dominic navigated the sleek midnight blue Aston Martin DBS along the winding curves of the Pacific Coast Highway. The sheer power of the supercar was effortless, gliding over the coastal asphalt with predatory grace. Inside the cabin, the atmosphere was perfectly calm. The chaotic, suffocating noise that had defined my entire existence for over 30 years was completely gone, replaced by the quiet, rhythmic hum of the tires and the soft jazz playing through the premium sound system. Dominic sat relaxed in the driver's seat. His expensive sunglasses shielded his eyes from the blinding sunset, his left hand resting easily on the steering wheel while his right hand held mine. His thumb traced slow, comforting circles over my knuckles. He did not need to say a single word. The quiet solidarity between us was stronger than any conversation. We had executed the perfect strike, dismantled the toxic parasites that had tried to drain my life, and walked away completely unscathed. I turned my gaze away from the breathtaking ocean view and looked down at my lap. Resting on the pristine leather of the passenger seat was my old cell phone. It was not the secure encrypted device I used to manage the daily operations of Apex Holdings. It was the personal phone I had kept active solely to monitor the dying gasps of my former family. I picked up the device and tapped the screen, waking it up one final time. The lock screen was absolutely littered with notifications. There were dozens of missed calls from blocked numbers, frantic voicemails left from cheap prepaid burner phones, and endless strings of text messages. Even after the public execution at the charity gala, even after the federal arrests and the brutal evictions, they had still tried to sink their claws into me. The messages fluctuated wildly between vicious, hateful insults, blaming me for their utter ruin, to pathetic weeping pleas, begging for a massive cash bailout. My father demanded I pay his federal tax lien. My mother begged me to buy them a new house. Brittany, operating from a borrowed phone, had sent a sprawling, unhinged paragraph accusing me of ruining her life, while simultaneously asking for a loan to hire a criminal defense attorney for her wire fraud charges. I stared at the glowing screen, waiting for the familiar heavy knot of anxiety to form in my chest. I waited for the misplaced guilt or the desperate childhood need for their approval to surface. But as I read the names of the people who shared my DNA, I felt absolutely nothing. The emotional manipulation that used to paralyze me was completely powerless. They were no longer my family. They were just desperate strangers screaming into a void. I did not read the messages. I did not listen to the voicemails. I pressed the power button and held it down until the screen went entirely black, severing their final digital connection to my world. I reached over and pressed the silver button on the door panel. The heavy glass window of the Aston Martin rolled down smoothly, instantly filling the quiet cabin with the rushing, chaotic roar of the ocean wind. The cool coastal air whipped through my hair. "What are you doing?" Dominic asked softly, a knowing smile playing on his lips. "Cleaning house," I replied smoothly. I extended my arm out of the window, holding the black rectangle of plastic and glass over the blurring asphalt. I opened my fingers and simply let it go. The wind snatched the phone instantly. It tumbled backward over the steel guardrail, plunging violently down the steep, rocky cliffside before disappearing forever into the churning dark waters of the Pacific Ocean far below. It was completely gone. I rolled the window back up, sealing out the noise of the wind. A profound, overwhelming silence washed over my soul. The final heavy chain linking me to my traumatic past had just been permanently shattered. There was no guilt. There was no looking back. There was only the open road ahead. I shifted in my seat and leaned my head gently against Dominic's broad shoulder. He squeezed my hand tightly, driving us further down the beautiful sunlit coastline. I closed my eyes, absorbing the undeniable reality of my triumph. I had survived their abuse. I had built a $200 million tech empire from the ground up. I had found a brilliant, powerful partner who loved me fiercely and respected my strength. I had created my own family on my own terms. The federal prison sentences and the humiliating evictions were simply the natural consequences of their own toxic greed. But for me, the ultimate sweetest revenge was this exact moment. The ultimate revenge was absolute unbreakable peace. This story teaches us a profound lesson about the necessity of setting ironclad boundaries. We often feel obligated to tolerate toxic behavior simply because the perpetrators share our DNA. However, true freedom requires recognizing that loyalty should never cost your mental health or financial stability. Stella's journey proves that the most powerful response to manipulation isn't seeking validation, but building your own success and walking away in absolute peace. Your worth is defined by the self-respect you cultivate, not by those who exploit you. Take a moment today to evaluate your boundaries and step away from anyone draining your peace. Share your thoughts on this story in the comments below.